is a top 10 time. 2023 was a great reading year for me. I read so many amazing books. So today we're going to look at the top 10. No, it's that one. 10. Make sure it's actually in frame, that would be good. Now this list is in no particular order, but first off we have Network Effect. Now this shouldn't really be a surprise because Murderbot Diaries is one of my favorite series of all time. However, the first 4 are novellas and this is the first novel in the series, so I'm not saying I was worried about it translating to a full-length novel, but I did think this is going to be a different experience that I'm used to from Murderbot. However, it works so well. It's so good. It just expanded on everything I love about Murderbot. We got more mystery and depth from the plot itself. I got a lot more depth to Murderbot as a character. It got to interact with lots of different people and other robots. And it has this really interesting structural choice where it has little passages that are kind of cut off from the main text. And at the top it says, "Help me.file," and these are kind of like numbered interludes. And the way that that expanded on the main story, but also how they all came together and tied into the main plot at the end. Oh, it was so good. It was so good. There was the return of a favourite side character in this one. It was also the funniest of the Murderbot books so far, but also had the most emotional gut punches. That ending sequence, I didn't know whether to cry or laugh, so I did both. So if you haven't read Murderbot, do it. Next up we have the Shadow Casket, the sequel to the Ember Blade. Now this is kind of a weird one because I don't think this is a perfect book. I don't think this is even a perfect sequel. It does a lot of things that I wish it didn't do, and I wish it did some things differently. That being said, I just love these characters and I love this world so much. If you enjoyed the Ember Blade, you definitely need to read the Shadow Casket. I love the world, how it's fleshed out in this one. We get a lot more of the history of the world. This has one of the best final battles I have ever read in a book. It's so full on. There's so much going on and it's handled so well. Even the character arcs in the last third of this book, they're balanced so well. It's got such a large cast, and the problem with larger casts is sometimes characters can fall to the wayside, or we kind of get like half arcs where you just, okay, yeah, they've not really changed that much, but it's a person, they've gone through it, they're a side character, whatever. However, Chris Wooding does such a good job of managing such a large and interesting cast. They each go through so much and change so much as individuals, and all of their character arcs are so satisfying at the end. There's a couple that, oh man, there were some devastating scenes at the end of this book. It hurt. Also, Grub is one of the best characters, Grub Club. So if you're looking for some more modernized classic fantasy, Ember Blade, go read it, and then read the sequel. Now 2023 was the year of Sanderson. We got the 4 secret projects, we got the finale to his Skyward series, Defiant, and his Kickstarter subscription boxes came out monthly. So I would be amiss not to mention a couple of his books. First of all, Tress of the Emerald Sea. I enjoyed this way more than I thought I was going to. This is a fairy tale-esque story, and one of the things I really liked about this one in particular was the prose style that Sanderson went with was very fairy tale in tone. The way it is written is very not Sanderson. And I do actually like Sanderson's more simplistic, straightforward prose that he does in his main books. However, having this more fairy tale-esque flower, it's not really flowery, but leaning more towards that than his normal writing, it just works so well with his story, particularly this one. And I would love to see Sanderson write more in this style. This was also structured like a fairy tale in the way that we have certain roadblocks that we're going to cross over, and you do feel this level of progression through the story because you know certain milestones that you need to hit to get to the finale. We are following Tress, who's going out to save her friend. And in this world, the seas are made of spores. And I think there are 4 or 5 different types and they're different colors. And they each react differently to water. But all of them are very dangerous to sail on. In classic Sanderson fashion, the world building is crazy, but super inventive and really interesting. But having these color-coded C's almost, and you know that where we're going is the furthest point, you do feel this progression as we move towards the finale. Because having that sort of structure is very common in fairy tales, where we kind of have it in acts and you know where we're going. I think this just did a terrific job. However, while I enjoyed Tress, my favourite of the four was Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. The world building and just the aesthetic of this book, and I don't mean the visuals, but them too, more mean the visuals inside the text. So good. It did feel like reading an anime. This does have some romance elements, which normally isn't my thing at all. In some of it, I understand that people don't like the more young, awkward romance that Sanderson does, which is pretty prevalent in this. However, I think it's done well in the way that it is tied to the story itself and the world building. Just I really connected to the main two characters. Very much the trope of taking two people from completely different worlds and cultures and how they act and just throwing them together and seeing what happens. One of the characters is a nightmare painter. He lives in this city that is surrounded in a black shroud, and at night essence of darkness can come into the city and watch over people dreaming and take form from their nightmares. So they have these nightmare painters who find these dark essences and then paint them into something harmless, and that makes them dissolve, which just sounds so cool. And then there is Yumi, who is this type of chosen one, and she has to stack rocks and make very creative displays of art, and that summons these spirits that will then grant a wish. So not only does this have fascinating world building, it has fascinating world building twice over, and then it ties them together really, really well. But if you're wondering which of the 4 secret projects you should pick up, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, by far my favorite. This book hurt me. I finally started Robin Hobb in November, and I shot a whole video of my reading experience of this book, and I enjoyed it very, very much. This is very atmospheric, character-led story, and very traumatic. What is there to say about Hobb? She's a huge name in the fantasy space, and I'm so glad I finally started this story. I was worried because this first one does get the more mixed response because it is very slow, it is very character driven, but I had such a good time with this book. It was awful, I hated it, 10 out of 10, loved it. It was traumatic. This follows Fitz from being a very young boy, some of his earliest memories, up to him being sort of a young adult. And it's how he's starting to get trained to become this assassin. However, it's not the type of assassin that most people normally think. There's no skulking shadows, slashing with daggers, and running along rooftops. This is a lot more political, it's a lot more character-led, it's a lot slower, it's more to do with Fitz himself growing up. And when he does start to get trained to become an assassin, it's more about poisons and killing off people subtly. I've heard it just gets better and better with this series, so Royal Assassin, January, I can't wait. Funnily enough, staying in Trauma Land, we have the Sword of Kaigen. Now this I picked up immediately after finishing Assassin's Apprentice. It's another very traumatic story. There's a lot of really rough scenes to read in this. It is so highly praised, and in my opinion, it completely lives up to that. The character work in this is incredible. We follow Misaki, who is this mother who used to be a big fighter and used to kill to help people and save people. However, she got married off to this very traditional family where women don't really fight. They stay at home and they have kids. So a lot of the story is her kind of battling back and forth with loving her family, loving bringing up these children, but also kind of this longing for that life that she left in the past. We get some flashback chapters of her being just a badass, which is really cool to see. And the other main point of view is Mamoru, who is Misaki's son, as he's kind of training to become one of these warriors. And it's also a lot to do with this larger political scale and this sort of propaganda of war and this empire who's not really looking after the people. There's a lot of layers to this story. The world building is very reminiscent of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Lots of elements and pretty much bending with ice and water. And watching all the different applications of this magic system is so much fun, especially when we get to the more fighting stages of the book where you get to see it in more battle applications. that part I really enjoyed. I think some people are a little more split on this because of the structure. It's a strange structure for a fantasy book. This is very much structured like a war epic. It doesn't feel like a classic sort of fantasy book structure where all resolves in this final battle between two sides and yeah, one of them wins and they're the good guys, or however normal fantasy book ends. This has quite a big tail off. It has quite a big falling action section, which is where we kind of have a more introspective segment where it's a lot more philosophical and you get to see more of the outcomes of battle and just some of the brutalities and the horrific things that happen in war. It's a really unique reading experience and I highly recommend picking it up. Next up we have the combat codes. I really enjoyed this book. It takes place in a world where big political disputes are dealt with through one-on-one combat. So each country have their own fighters that they train up to become the best of the best, because that puts your country in a much higher standing if you can win in these one-on-one duels. This follows Murray, a washed up old Griever Knight who used to be a really good fighter. However, now he looks for young talent. Step in point of view too. Seago. Now Seago's really interesting because you get these flashbacks of him somewhere very far away from where he is when we first meet him, and it's kind of trying to fill in how he got from there to here while also seeing him train up to become one of these Griever Knight. Fun is really just the best word for this book. It's got the skill trope in it, it's got lots of feel-good moments, it's also got some dark turns, dark twists, and it has a terrific ending where it just throws everything into the air. It's a really good ending. And I cannot wait to pick up book 2. Next up we have Jade War. Now I will say when I was first reading this, I expected it to be something that it's not. With the title Jade War, I thought there was going to be lots of big battles and wars. However, this is a very political, character-driven story, much like Assassin's Apprentice. So I do think my expectations going into this were kind of flipped on their head, which was a little jarring when I expected it to be more action orientated. However, the longer I sit with this, the more and more I just think about it. It's such a good story. The character work is incredible. The political machinations are great. The world building is fascinating. It has this really cool jade magic system that's kind of like this green gem that powers up the individual who's wearing it, but you can wear too much and it makes you sick and you can die. However, what really sticks with me with this series is the characters. I love Shay as a character. She's fascinating, particularly in this book. She goes through a lot. As well as Hilo. I know some people don't like him because of some of the choices he makes, but that just makes him so much more interesting as a character, because you can see why he's doing what he's doing, even if you don't agree with what he's doing. And Beryl, I hate Beryl so much. There's just... Next up, we have The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. Now this is such an interesting full-on book, and this is a very floppy book that I'm waving about. There's just so much to this book in the themes and in the character work and just some of the plotting, how it's done. There's just so much depth to each part that you could really sit down and have a long full-on discussion with someone else about this book. It is fascinating the way that Mark Lawrence has structured and written this book. It follows two characters. We have Evar, who's locked in this library, and then Lavira, who lives out in the desert, and she's coming into the city. And it's how their stories intertwine with this library and this very theme-heavy plot of progression of mankind. Lots of ideas and philosophical ponderings on just knowledge as a whole. And just the way this is all so neatly pulled together in the ending. Really well done. And it's a magical library. Who doesn't love a magical library? And I will say that this magical library is a very unique setting. Despite the fact that you've probably read magical libraries before, this one has a lot of stuff in it, and to do with it that just really makes it stand out from the rest. I think I've said this with every book so far, but really looking forward to the sequel coming out next year, which we got a cover reveal for recently. I did say at the start of this video that these weren't ranked. However, I will say that this last book was my favourite book of the year, and that is, say it with me now, Dungeon Crawler Carl. This book was just so much fun. It completely blew me out of the water with how much fun I had listening to the audiobook, which is how you should consume this story, because the audiobook is so good. I did a whole video talking about this series, so if you want more detail, definitely go check it out. However, this series hijacked my reading for the second half of this year. I was not planning on reading these books, and now I'm on book 5, and they are really, really fun. This is a lit RPG series, which means there are game-like mechanics, which means the main character has a level, and the more monsters he kills, he can level up and increase his dexterity and strength and all these different traits. Likewise, he can find items just like in a video game and use these items as sort of buffs to build up his strength or add these different abilities. Earth is invaded by aliens, and they create this thing called the Dungeon, which is pretty much a survival alien TV show for humans. So all of the surviving humankind go into this dungeon where this TV show takes place, and they are promised if they survive, they will be let out into the universe unharmed. So this follows Carl and Princess Donut, his cat, as they work their way down the levels in this dungeon, killing monsters, finding cool loot and items, and just trying to survive. This series is hilarious. The comedy's really, really funny. So you have these fun antics of them working through the dungeon, but there's also this political overstory of those that are running the dungeon itself, and they pull out crawlers who are in this TV show to go on talk shows, and that's where you get a lot more of this larger overstory. I cannot gush about this series anymore. If you've not read it, I'm just disappointed. If you leave this channel with any recommendation, Dungeon Crawler Carl, okay? Just go read it, it's so good. My book Harbinger of Justice also came out this year. It's got a pretty cover. And that'll do it for today. Thank you very much for watching. 2023 was such a good year for reading. Found so many new favourites that are going to stick with me forever. So let me know in the comments below, what were your top 10 reads of 2023? Could always do with more books for the TBR. And a huge thank you to my patrons who keep this channel alive. Over there is bonus videos, writing snippets of whatever I'm working on, and you also get to pick what books and then vote on what we read for the monthly book club. So thank you again, your support is huge. But thank you very much for watching. Outro. So many good books. So good books, man.